I wanted this channel to be about positive things, nature, mindfulness, life outside the noise of politics. But somehow I ended up making this. The truth is, we all see the world through our own frame. Our history, our culture, our place on the map. It all shapes how we understand what's happening around us. I'd like to share mine. This is a Northern European perspective, not the view of some global superpower, not the view of those who get to write history, but the view of a small tribe trying to survive, caught between big powers playing their games. Mainly, I want to describe Europe, how I see it, what I think Americans and others too often misunderstand. The things that don't always make into the Hollywood movies, news cycles or political speeches. The details that get lost when people lump all Europe into one thing, ignoring how different life can be from one part of the continent to the other. I also want to talk about where we are now, what history led us here, and why things look different when you live next to someone much stronger than you. Someone who, from time to time, might decide to run you over. Maybe this can shed some light on why we think the way we do, and why some of us are worried about where things are heading.
Americans, we need to talk. And before you say anything, no, Europe is not one country. Look, I get it. You hear Europe and you think baguettes, castles and tiny cars. But Europe is a continent of 44 countries, each with its own language, laws, culture and history.
Imagine lumping together Texas, California and Vermont. Calling them the same, doesn't work.
Surprise! There are guns in Europe. We just make sure fewer unhinged people get them. Most countries have hunting cultures, sport shooting, and yes, even home defense in some places. The difference? Background checks, training, and regulations. We don't sell them at Walmart next to frozen pizzas.
Oh, another thing, our police. They are pretty well trained. You won't see them panic shooting at the slightest movement. They go through actual training before getting a badge. A cop who stops you or stops your car isn't going to unload a full magazine because you reach for your wallet too fast.
And let's talk about our militaries. Europe isn't one country, so every nation has a different military structure. Some countries are heavily armed, others barely have an army. Switzerland? Every male citizen is basically part of the reserve army, and they have a ton of guns.
And Finland, a country of only 5.5 million people, that could actually mobilize over 900,000 trained reservists in case of war. France, a nuclear power with actual global military presence. Meanwhile, some countries like Iceland don't even have a military.
So no, Europe isn't just anti-gun or defenseless. We just have a different approach. Fewer mass shootings, fewer shoot-first cops, and militaries that fit the needs of each country, instead of pretending we're all in an action movie. Americans love talking about democracy, but let's be honest. You have two parties, and your election system is, well, let's say, interesting. Meanwhile, in Europe, we have coalition governments, proportional representation, and multiple parties actually representing different views. Your choices are basically Pepsi or Coke. We've got the whole damn supermarket.
Right now, I see some extremely dangerous things happening, things that should concern every free democracy. The United States, President Trump, and the invasion of Ukraine are all connected, and not in a good way. For decades, NATO has kept peace in Europe. It has deterred war, stopped invasions, and protected democracy. But now, Trump openly says he doesn't care about NATO. He mocks the idea of defending US allies. He's willing Russia to expand and even talks about taking land from America's own reliable allies. He is destroying trust between US and democratic nations, while strengthening ties with authoritarian regimes. Inside the US, maybe he is fixing some things, removing ideological nonsense like DEI or cutting unnecessary bureaucracy. But that's not enough to overlook his deep admiration for dictators. I don't want to compare him to Hitler, but let's be real, Hitler also did good things for Germany's economy in the beginning. So did Putin for Russia. But what's the cost? Like Hitler, Stalin, Putin eliminated his opponents. Trump, so far, has only destroyed his opponents on social media. But his talk of empire building matches that of any dictator. He's lying at the speed that makes fact-checking useless. By the time you call out one lie, he already said 10 more. And to lie about the invasion, to blame the victim and praise the invader, that is evil. Of course, Trump's actions inside US and outside US are different, and I can totally understand why actually some people do vote him. In general, Europeans, at least on the little bit left, do think that how is it possible that people vote for Trump? Women, black people, Latinos, are they insane or stupid? But if you do a little bit digging and watch some videos, for example, from the other side, you will see other side of Trump. Within USA, he can be quite actually cute and warm, and he's a medium and he can take his audience. He can take the audience in a way that the Democrats never can. Anyway, I mainly blame left for the rise of Trump, and the extremist right also. If the left had been critical of its own radicals, if it had controlled the extreme way it was pushing its agenda, we wouldn't be in the mess we are now. But instead, left was full of cowards, too afraid of being cast out if they said anything against their own extremists. And hey, I am a leftist. But I guess not that popular anymore. And so, absurd ideas were allowed, even protected, while normal people watched in disbelief. And here we are. Backlash is here, and it's worse than it had to be. This happens in every ideology, any religion. If you never allow critical review of your own movement, it turns into a cult. And once it becomes a cult, it stops listening. And that's exactly what happened with the modern left. And I also do blame social media. It enables ideological bubbles to form, bubbles so strong that they cleanse away any disagreeing opinions. No discussion, no challenge, no reality checks, just pure, undisturbed march forward, driven by the puritans of the moment. And when you block out all dissent, you lose all ability to course correct. That's what happened. The left refused to see where it was going, and by the time people reacted, it was too late. Populists like Trump were already rising to power. Now Europe and democratic world must unite. But uniting isn't enough. We have to fix the root problems that allowed this mess to happen. And it is a mess. There were mistakes made. Energy dependence in Europe, Germany, uncontrolled immigration, bloated public sector. Clean them up, and you take away the populists' biggest weapons.
Ever wonder why so many refugees come to Europe? Let's connect the dots. The US invades, bombs, and brings democracy to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. Then suddenly people need a new home. And guess who takes them in? Yep, Europe.
I'm not saying Europe handled it perfectly. We surely didn't. But acting like it's all our problem while ignoring who actually started the mess, well, that's convenient. And yeah, I guess some of us were there with Americans. It is not simple. I am not criticizing the core or the original idea behind the wokeness. But parts of Europe have gone a bit extreme with this woke culture. And let's be real, that started in the US. Hollywood, social media, identity politics, all exported, just like McDonald's and reality TV.
Now there's a backlash, and right-wing parties are gaining popularity across Europe. Funny how history repeats itself, huh? Americans think Russia's influence is just some Facebook ads. But in Eastern Europe, it's decades of spies, secret police, and infiltration. And yes, even Putin himself was stationed in East Germany as a KGB agent before the Soviet Union collapsed. A lot of people forget or conveniently ignore that the Soviet Union started World War II together with Nazi Germany. They signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939, divided Eastern Europe, and invaded Poland together. But unlike Germany, the Soviet Union never apologized. To this day, many Russians insist they were the heroes and victims, completely ignoring the fact that they were also invaders. Even now, Russia tells countries like the Baltics, Poland, and Ukraine that they should be grateful for the help the Soviet Union gave them. Help? You mean invasion, occupation, mass deportations, and forced labor camps. If you wonder why Eastern Europe is so wary of Russia, well, history doesn't just disappear. Let's talk about the heroes of the Soviet Union. No, not war veterans. Children who reported their own parents to the secret police. In Soviet times, you weren't just taught to love the Communist Party. You were taught to spy on your neighbors, your teachers, and even your own family. And if you tried to escape, border guards who shot people were also considered as heroes of Soviet Union. The Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain, and thousands of kilometers of barbed wire weren't there to keep people out. They were to keep Soviet citizens from fleeing. Can you believe they were and still are celebrated of shooting their own citizens in the back? Informants and paranoia were everywhere. If you had the wrong opinion, the wrong joke, or the wrong friend, you might disappear. Many of these people are still alive today, living inside free European countries. Some changed, some never did. And others, they still work in politics, media, and business. Many still loyal to Kremlin. This is why Russia behaves the way it does. Many in Russia still dream of restoring their former glory, just like Germany did before the rise of the Nazis. It's all psychology. A wounded empire trying to reclaim its lost power. And guess what? We've seen this before, and it didn't end well last time. So next time someone tells you that NATO expansion is the real provocation against Russia, maybe ask them why so many Eastern European countries ran to join NATO as fast as they could. They knew exactly what Russia is capable of.
Remember those agents of KGB and people who reported their families or neighbors? Well, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the official story was simple. We are fighting Ukrainian Nazis. Well, let's ask a simple question. Who was behind the violence in eastern Ukraine before 2022? For sure, it wasn't just Ukrainian Nazis. There were some people there left from the fall of Soviet Union. There were Russian people, there were pro-Russian people, and whoever who maybe didn't want peace to continue or maybe did want the Soviet Union to return. It's no secret that the Kremlin funds and arms extremist groups all over Europe. Far right, far left, separatists, conspiracy theorists. They don't care about ideology. If it weakens the West and the countries they want to invade, they will support it.
And in eastern Ukraine, let's just say not all the fighters were locals. The same thing is happening across Europe. Russia funds extremists on both sides, the far right and far left, because chaos is the goal. In Germany, France, Italy, even the US. And they do it the same way they did in Soviet times, by finding people willing to sell their soul for a paycheck. So next time someone tells you Russia is just misunderstood, or NATO is the real aggressor, ask yourself, why do so many Eastern European countries still fear Russia? Because they haven't forgotten, and neither should we.
It's easy to blame Russia alone, but let's talk about something worse, the pro-Putin forces inside Europe. Some political parties and leaders in Europe are openly pro-Putin. Look at AfD in Germany or Leader in Hungary. Some factions in Romania and other nations lean towards Moscow's influence. These people don't want strong, independent Europe. They want to return to the Cold War days, where entire nations were Soviet-controlled puppet states. Let's ask the real question. What do these politicians actually want? It's not just about supporting Putin. It's about gaining total control over their own countries. They don't want democracy, free elections, or opposition. They want the absolute power that past European dictators enjoyed, like Ceausescu in Romania, or other totalitarian rulers of the Eastern Bloc. Putin's role in this isn't just to be their direct ruler. He doesn't need to be. He simply provides the model. Follow Russia's lead, silence your opposition, destroy independent media, and you get to rule unchallenged, as long as you never step out of the line with Moscow's interests. The idea of Europe returning to this kind of authoritarianism is terrifying. But history has shown us, if people don't fight for democracy, they will lose it. And some of these politicians are already laying the groundwork.
Germany is one of the most confusing political landscapes in Europe. On one hand, it has spent decades making sure Nazis never rise again. Far-right parties like the AfD are growing in popularity. But instead of liking the US, the country that helped rebuild Germany and made it rich and powerful, they dislike America and seem to like Putin. It makes no sense. The same people who claim to stand against foreign control and defend German sovereignty are more than willing to let Russia take over the Baltics, just like Hitler did. The same nationalists who cry about German pride seem to have no problem bending the knee to a former KGB agent who would gladly treat Germany like a puppet state. And what about the West? The walls of Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich are covered with slogans against Nazis. Everywhere you look, there are reminders: never again, fight fascism, Nazis out. And that's a good thing. But guess what you'll never see? Slogans against communists. It's as if half of Germany only remembers half of history. East Germany wasn't just some quirky socialist experiment. It was a brutal dictatorship ruled by the Stasi, where people were spied on, imprisoned, and executed. But do you see the same outrage about that? Because a large part of the Western German left is made up of spoiled rich kids who never had to live under actual communism. These are the same people who imported the worst of America's woke ideology. The "all cops are bastards" slogans, identity politics, all copied from the US. But ask them about China's human rights abuses, Putin's political assassinations, or the Stasi's brutal past, and they suddenly lose their voices. There's a reason Germany is so scared of the AfD. They remember how the Nazis came to power, legally, through democracy. In the 1930s, people underestimated the Nazi Party. They thought, oh, they'll never actually take control. Well, they did, and within a few years, democracy was dead. Now, Germany is trying to prevent history from repeating itself. The government and media are openly blocking the AfD, calling them a threat to democracy. The problem: this strategy could backfire. In the 1920s and 30s, the Nazis and communists made each other more extreme by constantly clashing in the streets. The more one side fought, the stronger the other became. And that's exactly what's happening now. Banning the AfD won't stop their ideas. If anything, it might make them stronger. People don't like being told what they can and can't vote for. And if history has taught us anything, pushing political movements underground only makes them more dangerous. Germany is at a crossroads. The far right in the east, the woke left in the west, and in between, millions of people who just want a sane, balanced democracy. But if Germans don't wake up to all of history, not just the parts that fit their ideology, then they might just repeat it.
And let me give you another example of where European countries are not together, but a little bit like every country for themselves. When the Ukraine war started, the energy problems also started. So one of the biggest failures in modern Europe has been the energy policy. And just like everything else, it followed an extreme black and white way of thinking. Instead of rational, balanced decisions, we got emotional propaganda aimed at feelings rather than logic. Even children were used in these campaigns to push political decisions that had no proper long-term plan. The results? Disaster. Germany shut down all its nuclear plants, causing chaos in the European energy markets. Why should southern Swedes, for example, have to pay for Germany's bad decisions? And in the same breath, Germany trusted Putin for energy, becoming completely dependent on gas from a dictator. You couldn't make a worse plan if you tried. And when did things go wrong? Germany froze the energy prices, shielding its citizens from real costs. Great deal, right? Except they didn't care who took the losses, because the main owner of the German energy giant Uniper was Finland. So instead of Germany suffering for its own mistakes, Finnish taxpayers paid the price. Here's what happened. Finland's state-owned energy company Fortum was forced to sell its shares to Uniper to the German government at a terrible price. And right after this, Germany lifted the price freeze. Uniper started making huge profits, and Finland got nothing. Germany walked away richer, and Finland walked away robbed. This did not make me look kindly on Germany. And I know I'm not the only one in that. We are losing trust in each other, and that is exactly what Putin, and now I guess Trump too, wants. A broken, divided Europe in their dream. And then we have the electric cars, another issue driven by ideology instead of reality. Everything is black and white, with electric good, everything else bad thinking. But the reality, it's not that simple. I personally drive a 53-year-old car that runs on biogas, which is far greener than any electric car. But because of the oversimplified political agenda, that doesn't count as green. Meanwhile, governments push electric cars without even solving the real problem: mining, battery waste, energy grid capacity. It's policy making by ideology, not by reason. Europe has real problems, but instead of practical solutions, we keep getting extremes. And that is what's tearing us apart. And for the future, don't get me started about the AI issues. Europe clearly is not on that wagon.
Before we go any further, I want to say something personal. My views are limited. I see things from the Northeast, from Finland, and maybe a little from Germany, where I have lived for 5 years. I have also lived briefly in the capitals of the modern superpowers, the US and China, as well as in Istanbul. I've traveled around the globe, trying to learn as much as I can, keeping an open mind. But coming from Finland, I am, of course, biased by our history and generational trauma. My father saw the bombings as a boy when the Soviets were dropping bread baskets. That's what they called their cluster bombs on Finnish cities. And here's the thing, Soviet propaganda then. It's still the same today. Russia always plays the victim while invading someone else. Most of the world has no idea what it feels like to live next to Russia, or to live between superpowers who decide to reshape the world, and you just happen to be in the way. Afterwards, these big powers even have the arrogance to blame small nations for choosing sides or doing bad things. But what is the truth? What could the people between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union really do? They did what they could to survive. Some fought, many surrendered and died, and others ended up taking sides. Both the Soviets and the Nazis had camps, both killed, both raped, and yes, many of those who picked a side ended up participating in these horrors. But for some reason, it feels like only the ones who joined the Nazis are blamed for their crimes. I'm not saying anyone should be excused, but let's be real. These people weren't just bad guys. They were victims of Hitler and Stalin, and some of them, through brutality, became monsters themselves. But what choice did they have? What would you do standing between two genocidal regimes? Because of this history, the people of these countries see the world differently. It's not about East versus West or good versus evil. It's about survival. And when I hear Westerners say things like, just negotiate with Russia, or just trust democracy to fix itself, I know they don't understand. They've never had to live next to a monster. Some of you may agree with me, some of you won't. But if nothing else, I hope you understand this. History isn't black and white. The way we see the world depends on where we come from. And for those of us who have lived between superpowers, who have seen war on our lands, or felt its echoes in our families, history is never really over. It's alive, and it still shapes the world today. Before I end this, I need to say something important. I can differentiate between the country of Russia, its history, its leaders, and its people. Because Russia is not just Putin, it's not just the Soviet Union, and it's definitely not just war and propaganda. Some of my most trusted and loving friends are Russians. And luckily, they are also very smart people. We can even disagree and strongly disagree and still stay friends. That's something the rest of the world could learn from us. Because, let's be honest, this is rare today. Too many people think that disagreeing means hating each other. But we don't have to be like that. We can argue, challenge each other, and still respect one another. We don't have to cancel each other or put each other into boxes of good and evil. This is something I wish more people understood. You can criticize a government without hating the people. You can love a country's culture while rejecting its politics. And you can be friends with someone even if you don't agree on everything. Because in the end, it's not borders or governments that matter most. It's people. And if we forget that, then history really will repeat itself.
Okay, and if you made it this far, wow, you must be almost as crazy as I am. Thank you for sticking with me. I'm sure there were incorrect opinions, things you disagree with, or maybe even few points you want to debate. Please do so. Drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. And of course, if you like this, or even if you hated it, but stayed entertained, please like and subscribe. It does help a lot. I promise I'll try to move into something nicer in the next videos. What about mushroom picking in the forest around our retreat? That should help take our minds off all this darkness, at least until we find some suspicious poisonous ones. Until next time, thanks again. See you soon.